Hello everyone and welcome back to another book review. Today I am reviewing Assyrian Prophecies by Simo Parpola. This is part of the State Archives of Assyria series. So this was a book that I was inspired to read having read a previous book called Inanna, Lady of the Largest Heart. And I'm going to talk about what's in this book, what you can expect from this book, things I enjoyed from this book, and things I wish this book had maybe done a little differently. So if you're interested in ancient history, then come along and we're going to review Archives of Assyria, Assyrian Prophecies. So this book, first of all, do not let the size fool you. It's a little under 100 pages, not counting the introduction, but you do need to read the introduction. It took me about 2 weeks to work through this entire book, and I was taking copious notes the entire time, and I have some things tabbed. So this book, Assyrian Prophecy, deals with texts that not me personally, but archaeologists have been able to dig up and recover and piece together and translate that took place in Assyria, and are texts that mirror prophecy or oracles or other religious texts. So recently I read Inanna, Lady of the Largest Heart, which was a collection of poems that were written by a priestess addressed to Inanna, who was a Sumerian goddess. But Inanna was a goddess who kind of morphed and changed throughout different cultures throughout the Near East. So in this section here, it says the cult of Ishtar, whose roots are in the Sumerian cult of Inanna, has close parallels with the Canaanite cult Asherah, the Phrygian cult Cybele, and the Egyptian cult of Isis. So it's a goddess who kind of spread throughout this region, and that is relevant. That book inspired me to do more looking into other religious texts and books about it, which led me to this book, which is relevant because Ishtar, who is related, as we just read, to Inanna from the first book I read, features prevalently in the oracles and religious texts of this book. So there is a connection, and that's how I got to this book. The book is divided into two parts. The first is an introduction, which is about half of the book. There's a lot of footnotes, copious amount of footnotes, and then there is the actual text. So the first half is the introduction, and the second half is quite literally the text with the reconstructed Assyrian bit here, and then a translation on this side with all of the footnotes. And this is how you know you're in trouble, when your footnotes are almost more than the text at the top. So you do need to read the introduction. Do not skip the introduction. And the introduction, I'm just going to read directly from this part at the beginning. The introduction deals partly with questions that are concretely related to the prophecy corpus, which is the second half of this book, such as the identity of prophets, the structure of the text, or the date and historical context of the individual oracles, and partly with questions relating to the nature of Assyrian prophecy. So the introduction introduced you into the historical context with which these prophecies were written down, what they were applied to, the priest or priestesses who gave these prophecies, their names, and anything that we can learn about them, as well as other identifying and important detail like how big these texts, clay tablets were, what's missing, how we can reconstruct them, and what we can and can't say about the prophecy or the text that we're going to be reading. The parts from the introduction that I found most interesting was the section that talked about the Assyrian concept of God and gods. I thought that part was really interesting and gave additional background on things I've already read, as well as things I would be reading in this book. The background on Ishtar and her role, which is again connected to Inanna, which is the previous book I've read. I felt like that section was really good, gave me some background. The structural elements, that was really interesting to me. So there's a breakdown of format and like conventions that are used, and there's this really interesting chart in the introduction which kind of shows you which elements are going to be present and how we can kind of use this to maybe anticipate what's being said, or different stylistic formats that were used when writing these prophecies. So I felt like that was really interesting, the language, the style, the voice. And then there was a lot of comparison to prophecy that has been recorded in the Bible, so the Old Testament prophets. There's a lot of comparison in linguistic conventions and styles and the way things are phrased between those two. And you're going to find in the back of the book a convenient list of all of the texts or the things that were referenced, the chapter and verses that were referenced in the back on page 79. So biblical passages cited or discussed. So that is included in the back for your reference. Once you get through the introduction, there's about 50 pages, it feels, of footnotes, and then we move into the collections, where the collections include, as I've mentioned here, the original language, including parts that are missing or reconstructed, and then as good of a translation that can be in the second column. So these are side by side. Now, this book, as you can probably tell, leans a little bit more academic. A little bit. That's an understatement of a century. And I do like that because I feel like it can mentally challenge myself, but I don't read Assyrian. Like, I don't read this language at all. It was interesting to sometimes see like, oh, I can pick up on what this word is because I've seen it multiple times, but this is essentially meaningless to me. So I was just reading this. The footnotes too, and the author actually admits this in the introduction. If you're a general reader, most of the footnotes are not going to be necessary for you to read to understand it. It does give a fuller picture, but I truly honestly just skimmed the footnotes, or I would look to see what was interesting, because I'm not reading this from an academic standpoint. So the author does understand that there will be some general readers who might just have a passion or interest in history and don't need to go into the details of reconstructing a particular vowel sound from the text. Like that is far above my interest level in this, but I'm glad it's there for those who do have that more academic interest, or if you pick this up as a general reader and decide to go deeper, you can. But for me, this was kind of meaningless. I just read this section right here. There's also convenient sections in the back. I've already mentioned the one that shows the biblical passages referenced, but there's also sections that have a glossary, so you can see how they're, I guess, translating things, a list of personal names and place names, which was very, very helpful. There's also an interesting section, there's subjects, so if you're looking for a particular subject, that can be helpful. There's a section which shows the actual, like, I don't know if it's technically cuneiform, but the original text and how it looked, I guess, and how it was reconstructed, as well as those biblical passages, and then pictures of the original plates that were used. So that's all in the back, the glossary, the appendices, that section, which also includes a lot of interesting, relevant information. Overall, this book was very, very enjoyable and a good companion to what I have been reading. It definitely skews academic, already talked about that, but I wouldn't let that dissuade a casual or general reader from reading it. I would say this is probably more enjoyable if you already have a basic background. If you've never heard of Assyria before, this is probably not the place to start. But if you've read some other things and are just looking to kind of intellectually stimulate and challenge yourself, a book like this could be interesting. It is a deep dive, and do not let the size fool you. It took me about 2 weeks of reading to get through it, and I took lots of copious notes. So don't think, oh, it's just 70 pages. It's going to be quick and easy to get through. At least it took me quite a bit of time to work through as well. The one thing I would have preferred, and maybe this isn't the point or the goal or the aim of a book like this, but I wish that this setup for the actual text had been similar to Inanna, Lady of the Largest Heart, where there was an introduction to the text you were about to read, then you just read the actual text like this, just no additional commentary when the actual text is being presented, and then maybe an analysis. But I think that might not have been the point of this book. But as a general reader, I preferred the Inanna, Lady of the Largest Heart, which I'm referencing many times and will have linked at the end of this video. I would have preferred that format from an understanding format, but I understand if that's not the goal of the author and this book. Overall, though, enjoyable, learned a lot, felt like it was intellectually stimulating, and recommend if you have a continuing interest in Assyria or ancient history, this could be an interesting book for you to check out. Or if you would like to reference some of the original oracles and prophecies that have been written, then maybe this would be interesting for you as well. So if you have read this book or have any thoughts, please let me know in the comment section down below. I love to receive your thoughts and comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.